Carl Jung explains, these subtle signs reveal he's secretly in love, in the deepest chambers of the human heart, where silence reigns and shadows dance with light. There exists a sacred territory that few dare to explore. It is here, in this twilight realm between what we know and what we feel, that love begins its most profound and mysterious work. Not the love that announces itself with fanfare and declaration, but the love that moves like morning mist through the corridors of consciousness, felt rather than seen, known rather than understood. The masculine soul, that ancient repository of strength and stoicism, finds itself confronted by a force that asks it to surrender everything it believes itself to be. For centuries, perhaps millennia, the masculine psyche has learned to construct elaborate fortresses around its most tender places. These are not mere defenses against a hostile world, but sacred temples where the most precious aspects of the self are kept safe from the profane gaze of those who might not understand the delicate nature of what lies within. Jung spoke of the persona as the mask we wear in our daily theatre, the carefully crafted image we present to the world. But beneath this mask lies something far more complex and beautiful, the anima, that feminine aspect of the masculine soul that knows the language of emotion, intuition, and connection. When love begins to stir in the depths of the psyche, it is the anima who first recognizes the presence of the beloved. She whispers her recognition in a language that the conscious mind cannot yet comprehend, speaking in symbols and sensations that bypass the rational defenses of the ego. The man who finds himself secretly in love becomes a walking contradiction, a living paradox that embodies the very essence of enantiodromia, Jung's principle of the tension between opposites. On the surface, he maintains his composure, his carefully constructed image of strength and control. He speaks in measured tones, makes rational decisions, and presents himself as the master of his own destiny. Yet beneath this controlled exterior, something wild and untamed has awakened. The anima has recognized her counterpart in the external world, and she will not be silenced by the ego's demands for order and predictability. This is the beginning of what Jung called the process of individuation, the journey toward wholeness, that requires us to acknowledge and integrate all aspects of ourselves, including those we have long kept hidden. The man in love finds himself confronted by parts of his psyche that he may have spent years, even decades, trying to suppress. The tender feelings that arise when he thinks of her, the sudden vulnerability that overwhelms him in her presence, the way his carefully constructed world seems to shimmer and shift when she enters the room. All of these are invitations from the unconscious to step into a larger, more complete version of himself. But the journey into love is not a simple one. It requires a kind of symbolic death, a willingness to let go of the familiar structures of identity that have served as protection for so long. The ego, that guardian of the known self, resists this transformation with every fiber of its being. It understands, on some deep level, that to love truly is to risk dissolution, to open oneself to forces that cannot be controlled or predicted. And so the dance begins, the eternal push and pull between the desire to reveal and the need to conceal, between the longing for connection and the fear of exposure. In the ancient alchemical tradition, this phase was known as the nigredo, the dark night of the soul, where the old self must be dissolved before the new can emerge. The man who loves in secret finds himself in this liminal space, suspended between who he was and who he might become. He experiences the strange alchemy of transformation, where the base metal of his ordinary existence begins to transmute into something precious and rare. Yet this process happens largely in darkness, in the hidden recesses of the psyche where the conscious mind cannot interfere. The signs of this transformation are subtle but unmistakable to those who know how to read the language of the soul. There is a softening around the edges of his personality, a way that harsh lines begin to curve into gentler shapes. The voice that once spoke only of practical matters now carries undertones of poetry. The eyes that once looked straight ahead now find themselves drawn to windows, to horizons, to the play of light and shadow that seems to mirror the dance happening within his own heart. This is the great mystery of love's beginning, not the thunderbolt of recognition that popular culture would have us believe, but the slow, patient work of the unconscious as it prepares the soul for its greatest adventure. The beloved becomes a kind of mirror, reflecting back to him aspects of himself that he has never fully acknowledged. Through her eyes, he begins to see himself not as the collection of roles and responsibilities he has assumed, but as a whole, human being capable of depth, tenderness, and profound connection. The Anima works through projection, casting her image onto the external world and finding there a vessel worthy of her devotion. But this is not a simple case of mistaken identity. Rather, it is the psyche's way of teaching the ego about its own potential for wholeness. The qualities he admires in her, her grace, her wisdom, her ability to navigate the world with both strength and compassion, these are often reflections of his own undeveloped potentials, aspects of himself that are seeking expression through the catalyst of love. Yet the masculine soul's relationship to vulnerability is complex and fraught with ancient conditioning. From the earliest age, boys are taught to hide their tender feelings, to transform pain into anger, to seek power rather than connection. These lessons run deep, carved into the very structure of the psyche, like channels worn by centuries of flowing water. When love begins to stir, it encounters these ancient patterns and must find ways to work around them, to speak its truth in a language that the conscious mind can gradually learn to understand. The process is often one of gradual revelation, like the slow dawn that creeps across the horizon, transforming the landscape degree by degree. At first, the man himself may not recognize what is happening. He notices that his thoughts return to her with unusual frequency, that conversations with her seem to carry a weight and significance that he cannot quite explain. He finds himself remembering not just her words, but the way the light fell across her face when she spoke them, the subtle shift in her expression that revealed something deeper than mere conversation. This is the Anima's work. She notices everything, stores it all away in the secret archives of the heart. She knows that love is not just about the beloved, but about the transformation of the lover. Through her careful attention to detail, she begins to weave a tapestry of connection that will eventually encompass the entire fabric of his being. Each small moment of recognition, each subtle sign of interest, each shared laugh or meaningful glance becomes a thread in this larger pattern that is slowly emerging. The persona, meanwhile, struggles to maintain its carefully constructed facade. It has spent years perfecting the art of emotional distance, of treating all relationships as transactions to be managed rather than mysteries to be explored. But love refuses to be managed. It seeps through the cracks in the persona's armor, like water through stone, finding its way into every corner of the psyche until resistance becomes futile. And yet, the resistance continues. The ego understands that to acknowledge love is to invite chaos into the ordered world it has worked so hard to create. To love is to give another person the power to transform you, to make you vulnerable in ways that go against every instinct for self-preservation. The masculine psyche, in particular, has learned to equate vulnerability with weakness, to see emotional openness as a luxury that cannot be afforded in a world that demands strength and certainty. But the unconscious knows better. It understands. That true strength comes not from rigid control, but from the ability to be flexible, to adapt, to allow oneself to be changed by life's experiences. The man who loves in secret is undergoing a profound education in the art of being human, learning lessons that can only be taught through the direct experience of the heart's awakening. This is why the signs of secret love are often so subtle, so easily missed by the casual observer. They are not the bold declarations of the ego, but the quiet whispers of the soul as it prepares for its greatest journey. The way his attention shifts when she enters the room, the unconscious mimicry of her gestures, the careful attention to her words and needs, these are all part of the Anima's patient work of preparation, her way of teaching the conscious mind about the art of loving. The veiled heart, then, is not a closed heart, but a heart in preparation. It is the chrysalis stage of love's development, where the transformation is taking place in darkness and silence, protected from the harsh light of judgment and expectation. Like the caterpillar that must dissolve completely before it can become a butterfly, the man in love must allow his old self to soften and dissolve before the new self can emerge. In this twilight realm where consciousness meets the unknown, love moves with the patience of geological time, reshaping the landscape of the soul with forces that are both gentle and irresistible. The masculine heart, accustomed to the world of action and decision, must learn to trust in the wisdom of waiting, of allowing the process to unfold in its own time and according to its own deeper logic. This is the great teaching of the veiled heart, that love is not something we do, but something we become. It is not a goal to be achieved, but a state of being to be inhabited. And in the secret chambers of the psyche, where the anima tends her sacred fire and the ego learns to trust in mysteries beyond its comprehension, the great work of transformation begins its slow, patient, beautiful unfolding. There exists a language older than words, more primal than speech, more honest than any declaration the conscious mind might craft. It is the language of the eyes, those twin mirrors of the soul, that betray every secret the ego seeks to keep. When love moves through the depths of the psyche, it is here, in the realm of sight and being seen, that its presence first becomes visible to the world. The eye, Jung understood, is never merely an organ of perception. It is the meeting place, between the inner and outer worlds, the sacred threshold where the unconscious reaches out to touch the mystery of another being. When we look upon someone who has stirred the depths of our soul, we are not simply seeing them, we are participating in an ancient ritual of recognition, a form of communion that precedes all conscious understanding. For the man whose heart harbors secret love, the eyes become both blessing and betrayal. They are the windows through which the anima peers out at the world, searching for her reflection in the face of the beloved. In these moments of visual connection, the carefully constructed barriers of the persona become transparent, revealing the raw vulnerability that lies beneath. The ego may speak in measured tones, may craft its words with precision and care, but the eyes tell a different story, one written in the ancient script of longing and recognition. This is why the glance becomes so fraught with meaning when love has taken root in the unconscious. What would be, in ordinary circumstances, a simple moment of human contact becomes charged with archetypal significance. The beloved becomes not just another person, but a carrier of the projected anima, the vessel into which the masculine soul pours all its unexpressed capacity for tenderness and devotion. When he looks at her, he is not seeing her as she truly is, but as the living embodiment of his own soul's deepest yearnings. The projection of the anima is one of love's most profound mysteries. Jung taught us that what we call falling in love is often the recognition of our own unconscious contents in another person. The man who finds himself captivated by a woman's grace may be encountering his own undeveloped capacity for beauty and elegance. Her wisdom becomes a mirror for his own intuitive depths, her compassion a reflection of his own buried tenderness. Through the act of seeing her, he begins, slowly and often unconsciously, to see himself. But this process of recognition does not happen in the clear light of conscious awareness. It occurs in the liminal spaces, the stolen moments when the ego's guard is down and the unconscious is free to express itself. The glance that lingers a moment too long, the way his eyes search for her in a crowded room, the unconscious tracking of her movements, even when he believes his attention is elsewhere. These are the Anima's way of maintaining contact with her. Projected image, of keeping the thread of connection alive even when the ego insists on maintaining distance. There is something almost shamanic about this visual communion, something that recalls the ancient practices of scrying and divination. When the man in love looks upon his beloved, he is engaging in a form of sacred seeing that transforms ordinary perception into revelation. Her face becomes a living mandala, a complex symbol that speaks directly to his unconscious in a language that bypasses rational thought. The curve of her smile, the light in her eyes, the way her hair falls across her shoulder, each detail becomes charged with numinous significance, a hieroglyph in the sacred text of his own transformation. This is why the eyes of a man in love carry such a particular quality of attention. There is an intensity there that goes beyond mere interest, a depth of focus that suggests the soul's complete engagement with its object of devotion. Jung spoke of this as the constellation of archetypal contents, the way certain images and experiences activate the deepest layers of the psyche, calling forth responses that seem to come from a place far older and wiser than the individual. Ego, the beloved, often unconsciously, begins to sense this quality of attention. She may not understand its source or significance, but she feels the weight of being truly seen in a way that goes beyond casual observation. This is not the predatory gaze that seeks to possess or consume, but something far more subtle and profound, the gaze of recognition, of soul calling to soul across the apparent divide between self and other. In the mythology of many cultures, the eyes are associated with divine vision, with the ability to see beyond the veil of ordinary reality into the deeper patterns that govern existence. When love awakens in the depths of the psyche, it brings with it something of this divine quality of sight. The man who loves begins to see the world differently, not just the beloved, but everything around her. Colors seem more vivid, patterns more meaningful, synchronicities more frequent. The Anima's influence extends beyond the specific object of projection to transform his entire relationship with the visible world. Yet this transformation comes with its own particular form of suffering. The eyes that have learned to see with such intensity cannot easily return to the casual glance of ordinary social interaction. The man in love finds himself caught between two worlds, the everyday realm where people look at each other with polite indifference, and the heightened reality where every glance carries the weight of cosmic significance. He must learn to navigate between these two modes of being, to maintain his social persona while honoring the deeper truth of his transformed vision. The stolen glance becomes, therefore, a form of prayer, a moment of communion with the sacred that must be snatched from the ordinary flow of social interaction. When she is not looking, when the coast is clear and the ego's defenses can safely lower, he allows himself the luxury of true seeing. In these unguarded moments, the Anima is free to drink deeply from the well of her projected image, to nourish herself on the beauty she has recognized in the external world. But even these stolen moments carry their own form of exquisite torment. The gaze that seeks to capture and hold the beloved's image finds itself constantly frustrated by the ephemeral nature of visual contact. She moves, she turns away, She becomes engaged in conversation with others, and the thread of connection is broken. The anima, like a bird returning to a nest that is no longer there, must learn to accept the discontinuous nature of these moments of visual communion. This discontinuity serves a deeper purpose in the economy of the psyche. If the beloved were always available to his gaze, if the visual connection could be maintained continuously, the projection might become too solid, too literal. The anima would lose her fluidity, her ability to serve as a bridge between the conscious and unconscious realms. The interrupted gaze forces the psyche to work with memory and imagination, to develop its capacity for inner vision as well as outer sight. In the quiet moments when she is absent, the man in love finds his inner eye becoming increasingly active. He replays their visual encounters with the devotion of a monk contemplating sacred texts, the way she looked when she laughed, the expression that crossed her face when she was thinking deeply, the particular quality of light in her eyes during their last conversation. All of these become part of an inner gallery, a collection of sacred images that nourish the soul in times of physical separation. This process of inner visualization serves the greater work of individuation. Through his careful attention to her image, the man begins to develop his own capacity for aesthetic appreciation, for recognizing beauty and meaning in the world around him. The anima, through her projection onto the beloved, is teaching the ego about its own potential for refined perception, for the kind of seeing that transforms the ordinary world into a realm of wonder and significance. The language of glances also speaks to the fundamental human need for recognition and witnessing. When the man in love looks upon his beloved with such intensity and care, he is offering her a gift that goes beyond mere attention. He is saying, without words, "I see you. I witness your existence. You matter in ways that I cannot fully express." This quality of being truly seen is one of love's greatest offerings, one of the ways the anima serves not just the individual psyche, but the larger web of human connection. Yet there is also shadow in this intense visual attention. The gaze that seeks to capture and hold can become possessive, demanding. The eyes that have learned to see the beloved as the carrier of projected anima contents may struggle to see her as she truly is, separate from their own psychological needs and fantasies. The challenge for the man in love is to maintain the intensity of his visual devotion while gradually learning to see beyond his projections to the autonomous reality of the other person. This is where the language of glances begins to teach its most profound lessons. True seeing, the kind that serves both love and individuation, requires the ability to hold paradox, to see the beloved both as the carrier of one's projections and as a separate, autonomous being with her own depths and mysteries. The gaze of mature love learns to appreciate the otherness of the beloved, to find beauty not just in the familiar reflections of one's own psyche, but in the genuine mystery of another consciousness. The unconscious wisdom of the anima slowly guides this process of visual education. Through countless moments of looking and being looked at, of recognition and misrecognition, the man in love begins to develop what we might call a spiritual quality of sight. He learns to see with reverence, rather than possession, with appreciation rather than demand. His eyes begin to carry the quality of light that comes from having touched the sacred dimension of existence. In the end, the language of glances becomes a form of prayer made visible, a way of offering devotion that requires no words and leaves, no trace except in the deepened capacity of the heart to recognize beauty and meaning in the world. Through the simple act of seeing and being seen, the man in love participates in one of existence's most fundamental mysteries, the way consciousness reaches out to touch consciousness, the way soul recognizes soul across the apparent divide between self and other. This visual communion, with all its sweetness and suffering, its moments of connection and periods of longing, serves the deeper purpose of awakening the heart to its own capacity for love. The beloved may never know the full significance of the glances she receives, may never understand that she serves as a doorway through which the masculine soul learns to see the world with new eyes. But the transformation is real nonetheless, written in the quality of attention that now permeates his relationship not just with her, but with all of life. The language of glances, then, becomes both the beginning and the ongoing practice of love's deeper education. Through the simple act of looking with the fullness of his being, the man in love learns to participate in the sacred dimension of existence, to see the world as the living expression of beauty and meaning that it has always been, waiting patiently for eyes clear enough to recognize its true nature. In the hidden chambers of the psyche, where consciousness shapes itself according to laws more ancient than reason, love works as the supreme architect of attention. It rebuilds the very geography of awareness, restructuring the landscape of the mind with the quiet persistence of water reshaping stone. When the masculine soul finds itself in the grip of secret enchantment, the entire edifice of perception undergoes a profound reconstruction, one that reveals itself not through grand gestures, but through the subtle mathematics of proximity and presence. The unconscious, that masterful choreographer of human behavior, begins to express its deepest truths through the language of space and movement. Where once a man might have positioned himself according to practical considerations, the best seat for conversation, the most efficient path through a room, the logical arrangement of social interaction, now his movements follow a different compass entirely. The beloved becomes a magnetic north, pulling his attention and his physical presence into patterns that speak of devotion long before the conscious mind recognizes what is unfolding. This is the profound mystery of love's gravitational field. Just as celestial bodies bend space-time around themselves, drawing other objects into their orbital influence, the beloved creates a distortion in the fabric of the lover's awareness. His attention, once distributed across the broad spectrum of daily concerns, begins to concentrate itself around her presence with the inevitability of physics. The ego may believe it is making conscious choices about where to stand, where to sit, how to navigate the social landscape, but the unconscious has already mapped out a different territory entirely. Jung understood that the psyche operates according to its own laws of attraction and repulsion, creating what he called complexes, autonomous patterns of psychological energy that function with a life of their own. When love takes root in the depths of the masculine soul, it creates perhaps the most powerful complex of all, the Anima projection that transforms an ordinary person into a living constellation of meaning. This complex doesn't merely influence thought and feeling. It reorganizes the entire structure of conscious experience, beginning with the most fundamental question of all: where to direct one's attention. The architecture of this transformed attention reveals itself in countless subtle ways. In a gathering of people, his awareness maps the room not according to social hierarchies or practical interests, but according to her location. She becomes the fixed point around which all other elements arrange themselves. Conversations that might once have engaged his full participation now serve as mere background music to the symphony of her presence. His peripheral vision develops an almost supernatural sensitivity to her movements, tracking her progress through space with the devotion of a medieval astronomer charting the course of a beloved star. This unconscious choreography of nearness operates with a sophistication that would be impossible to achieve through conscious planning. The psyche, in its wisdom, understands that direct approach might trigger the ego's defenses or social prohibitions. Instead, it works through indirection, creating what appears to be a series of coincidences and natural convergences. He finds himself choosing the coffee shop where she might appear, selecting the path through the office that passes by her workspace, positioning himself at gatherings in ways that maximize the possibility of interaction while maintaining the plausible deniability that the ego requires. The mathematics of this proximity are precise beyond conscious calculation. His unconscious measures distances with the accuracy of a surveyor, calculating the optimal range for connection without intrusion, for presence without presumption. Too close, and the intensity of his attention might betray the secret his ego is not yet ready to acknowledge. Too distant, and the anima's projection loses its power to nourish the soul's longing for connection. The sweet spot exists in that liminal zone where casual contact becomes possible, where chance encounters can unfold without the weight of obvious intention. This spatial choreography serves multiple functions in the economy of the psyche. On the surface level, it satisfies the anima's need for contact with her projected image, providing the psychological nourishment that comes from being in the presence of the beloved. But on a deeper level, it serves the process of individuation itself. Through the careful navigation of proximity and distance, the masculine soul learns to honor both its longing for connection and its need for autonomous space. It practices the delicate art of relationship, the dance between merging and separation that defines all healthy human bonds. The beloved, often unconsciously, begins to sense this transformed quality of attention. She may notice that he seems to appear in her vicinity with unusual frequency, that conversations with him carry a particular intensity of focus, that his presence in shared spaces creates a subtle but palpable shift in the atmosphere. This is not the aggressive pursuit of predatory attention, but something far more nuanced, the gravitational pull of a soul that has reorganized itself around the axis of devotion. In the ancient practice of sacred geometry, certain proportions and relationships were understood to create harmony and beauty. The man in love discovers his own version of these sacred proportions as he navigates the geometry of attention and proximity. The distance at which her voice carries most clearly to his ears, the angle of approach that allows for the most natural conversation, the timing of arrival and departure that maximizes connection while minimizing awkwardness, all of these become part of an unconscious curriculum in the mathematics of the heart. This architectural transformation of attention extends beyond physical proximity to encompass the entire landscape of shared experience. In group conversations, his awareness naturally attunes itself to her contributions, amplifying her words while filtering out competing voices. When she speaks, the background noise of social interaction fades to a whisper, creating an acoustic spotlight that illuminates her thoughts and feelings with crystalline clarity. Her laughter becomes a tuning fork that resonates through his entire being, organizing his emotional responses around the frequency of her joy. The temporal dimension of attention undergoes a similar reconstruction. Moments spent in her presence expand with the elasticity of psychological time, each second stretching to accommodate the wealth of observation and feeling that her proximity generates. Conversely, periods of her absence compress into abbreviated interludes of waiting, mere intervals between the meaningful moments when she returns to the orbit of his awareness. The ego's normal relationship with time, structured, predictable, oriented toward productivity and achievement, gives way to a more fluid temporality that ebbs and flows according to the rhythms of connection and separation. This reorganization of consciousness creates its own form of suffering, the particular anguish of the lover who must disguise his devotion as casual interest. The intensity of his attention, so carefully calibrated and consciously modulated, creates a constant tension between expression and concealment. Every gesture must be measured, every glance calculated, every movement through space weighted against the possibility of betraying the secret that pulses at the heart of his transformed awareness. Yet this very constraint serves a deeper purpose in the alchemy of psychological transformation. The pressure of unexpressed feeling, like carbon compressed into diamond, creates something precious and rare. The attention that must be carefully rationed becomes infinitely more valuable than attention freely given. Each moment of permitted focus, each opportunity for legitimate proximity, each chance encounter that the unconscious has carefully orchestrated becomes a treasure to be savored and remembered. The Anima, working through this architecture of attention, teaches the masculine soul about the sacred nature of presence itself. Through the careful cultivation of awareness, through the patient practice of being fully present to another's existence, he begins to develop what contemplative traditions have long recognized as a spiritual capacity, the quality of attention that love demands, sustained, reverent, completely engaged, is the same quality that mystics bring to their relationship with the divine. This transformation of attention also serves as a bridge between the individual psyche and the larger patterns of collective meaning. The beloved, carrying the projection of the anima, becomes a doorway through which the masculine soul connects with the archetypal feminine that exists not just within his own psyche, but as a fundamental organizing principle of existence itself. Through his careful attention to her particular manifestation of feminine qualities, he begins to develop a relationship with the feminine principle that will serve his individuation long after the specific projection has been withdrawn. The architecture of attention reveals its deepest wisdom in the way it prepares the soul for the eventual integration of opposites that Jung identified as the goal of psychological development. The careful balance between approach and retreat, between engagement and restraint, between expression and concealment that characterizes this phase of love becomes a training ground for the more general capacity to hold paradox and tension without resolution. This capacity, once developed, becomes one of the hallmarks of psychological maturity. In the end, the reorganization of consciousness that occurs when love awakens serves purposes far beyond the immediate drama of attraction and desire. It initiates the soul into mysteries that extend to the very foundations of human existence, the nature of attention as a form of prayer, the sacred geometry of relationship, the profound interconnectedness that underlies the apparent separation between self and other. Through the simple act of learning to position himself in space according to the heart's compass rather than the ego's convenience, the man in love participates in an ancient ritual of devotion that transforms not just his relationship to the beloved, but his relationship to existence itself. The architecture of attention, once reconstructed by love's magnetic force, never quite returns to its original configuration. Even when the specific enchantment fades, even when the projection is withdrawn, and the beloved revealed as merely human, the capacity for this quality of focused devotion remains as a permanent expansion of the soul's repertoire. The man who has learned to organize his consciousness around the sacred presence of another carries with him always the possibility of encountering the world with this same quality of reverent attention, this same capacity to recognize the divine, hiding in the ordinary disguise of everyday human existence. In the depths of the human psyche, where the ego's careful choreography meets the shadow's unruly truth, there exists a battlefield more ancient than any war recorded in history. It is here, in the trembling space between control and surrender, that the body becomes the ultimate betrayer of secrets the mind seeks to keep. When love stirs in the masculine soul, it awakens forces that cannot be contained by the persona's Polished performance and the shadow, that repository of all we have learned to hide, begins to speak through the honest language of the flesh. The shadow, in Jung's profound understanding, is not merely the dark side of personality, but the unlived life, the repository of everything we have pushed away in our quest to become acceptable to others and ourselves. In the masculine psyche, this shadow carries the weight of centuries of conditioning that has taught men to hide their vulnerability, to suppress their tenderness, to transform every soft feeling into something harder and more manageable. But love, that great dissolver of boundaries, refuses to be contained by such artificial constraints. When the heart begins its secret song of devotion, the shadow stirs with recognition. Here at last is something that cannot be managed, controlled, or transformed into acceptable social currency. The feelings that arise in love's presence are too raw, too immediate, too overwhelmingly real to be processed through the ego's usual mechanisms of rationalization and defense. And so the shadow, in its wisdom, begins to express what the conscious mind cannot yet acknowledge, speaking through the body's involuntary responses in a language older than words. The hands become the first poets of this hidden truth. Those same hands that have learned to gesture with confidence in boardrooms and classrooms, that have mastered the art of controlled movement and purposeful action, suddenly find themselves at odds with their owner's intentions. In her presence, they develop a life of their own, seeking occupation in the nervous fidgeting with pens, the unconscious adjusting of clothing, the restless movement that speaks of energy-seeking outlet. The shadow knows what the ego fears to admit, that these hands long to reach out, to touch, to connect in ways that would shatter the carefully maintained facade of casual interaction. This nervous energy is not mere anxiety, though it may appear so to the casual observer. It is the body's honest response to the presence of the numinous, the sacred breaking through into ordinary experience. The trembling that runs through controlled gestures is the same trembling that mystics have reported in the presence of the divine, the flesh's recognition that it stands before something that transcends its usual categories of understanding. The voice, that instrument of conscious communication, becomes another venue for the shadow's rebellion against the ego's control. The man who speaks with confidence in every other context finds his voice catching when he addresses her, discovers unexpected pauses in his speech, notices a slight tremor that enters his tone when the conversation turns to matters of the heart. The shadow is speaking through these vocal betrayals, expressing through subtle changes in timbre and rhythm what the conscious mind has forbidden itself to say directly. In the mythology of many cultures, the voice is understood to be the bridge between the inner and outer worlds, the means by which the soul expresses its deepest truth. When love begins to work its transformation in the masculine psyche, it reveals the profound disconnect between the voice of social convention and the voice of authentic feeling. The shadow, in its nervous interruptions and hesitations, is attempting to create space for this authentic voice to emerge. The ancient conflict between masculine composure and vulnerable truth plays out in every gesture, every movement, every moment of physical presence. The body that has been trained to occupy space with confidence and authority suddenly finds itself unsure of its own boundaries. The comfortable distance that has always existed between the self and others begins to feel either too close or too far, creating a constant state of subtle physical adjustment that speaks of the soul's restless search for the right relationship to the beloved's presence. This is the profound paradox of the shadow's nervous dance, that in its apparent loss of control, it reveals a deeper truth about the nature of authentic relationship. The composure that the ego has worked so hard to maintain is revealed as a form of armor, a protective barrier that must be softened if genuine connection is to occur. The shadow's nervous energy is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of life, of the psyche's vitality asserting itself against the deadening influence of too much control. Jung understood that the shadow contains not only what we have rejected about ourselves, but also what we have not yet fully developed. In the masculine psyche, the shadow often carries the undeveloped capacity for emotional expression, for vulnerability, for the kind of openness that makes true intimacy possible. When love awakens, it calls forth these shadow qualities, demanding their integration into the conscious personality. The nervous energy that manifests in the beloved's presence is the shadow's way of practicing this integration. Each fidget, each stumble over words, each moment of physical awkwardness is a small act of rebellion against the tyranny of the persona, a tiny step toward the authentic self that lies beneath the mask of social acceptability. The shadow is teaching the ego that perfection is not the goal, that fumbling, awkward, imperfect humanness is actually what creates the possibility for real connection. This process of shadow integration through nervous energy serves the larger journey of individuation. The man who learns to accept his own nervousness in the presence of love begins to develop compassion for all the ways he is human rather than heroic. He starts to understand that his imperfections are not obstacles to be overcome, but doorways to be walked through on the path toward wholeness. The beloved, often unconsciously, begins to sense the authenticity that emerges through these nervous betrayals of the ego's control. While the polished persona might have impressed her intellectually, it is the shadow's honest trembling that touches her heart. There is something deeply moving about witnessing someone's composure soften in the presence of genuine feeling, something that speaks to the soul's recognition of soul. In the alchemical tradition, the phase known as the nigredo, the blackening, or darkening, represents the dissolution of the ego's false certainties. The shadow's nervous dance can be understood as a form of this nigredo, a gentle but persistent undermining of the ego's illusion of control. Through the body's honest responses, the false self begins to crack, creating space for the true self to emerge. The hands that shake slightly when reaching for a cup of coffee in her presence are participating in this alchemical process. They are learning to be vulnerable, to reveal their humanness rather than their competence. The voice that wavers when speaking words of genuine appreciation is discovering its capacity for tenderness. The body that finds itself unsure of its usual confident movements is learning to inhabit space with sensitivity rather than dominance. This nervous energy also serves as a form of communication between the unconscious minds of the two people involved. The beloved's animus, the masculine aspect of her psyche, often responds to the shadow's nervous authenticity with a recognition that bypasses conscious thought. She may find herself drawn to his company, not because of what he says or does, but because of the quality of presence he brings when his defenses are down. The shadow's rebellion against the ego's control creates moments of profound beauty and vulnerability. The man who has learned to hide his feelings behind a mask of competence suddenly finds himself revealed in all his tender humanity. The nervousness that he might experience as embarrassing or weak is actually a form of courage. The courage to be imperfect, to be human, to be authentically himself in the presence of someone who matters. This is where the shadow's wisdom becomes most apparent. It understands that love cannot flourish in the sterile environment of perfect control. Love requires the compost of imperfection, the rich soil of acknowledged vulnerability, the honest admission that we are all in our deepest essence, trembling creatures reaching toward each other across the void of existence. The nervous dance of the shadow also teaches important lessons about the nature of masculine energy itself. The cultural conditioning that demands constant strength and control is revealed as a form of spiritual impoverishment, a cutting off from the full spectrum of human experience. The shadow's nervous energy is not a betrayal of masculinity, but a return to a more complete and authentic expression of masculine presence. In many traditional cultures, the trembling that accompanies encounter with the sacred is understood as a sign of spiritual sensitivity, not weakness. The man whose body responds to love's presence with nervous energy is demonstrating his capacity for reverence, his ability to be moved by forces greater than his ego's control. This is a form of masculine strength that has been largely forgotten. In our contemporary world, the strength to be vulnerable, to be affected, to allow oneself to be transformed by love. The process of learning to accept and integrate the shadow's nervous authenticity becomes a crucial step in the journey toward emotional maturity. The man who can embrace his own nervousness, who can find the courage to be imperfect in love's presence, discovers a form of confidence that is far more attractive than the brittle composure of the defended ego. This is the confidence that comes from self-acceptance, from the willingness to be human rather than heroic. As the shadow's nervous dance continues, it gradually teaches the ego new ways of being in relationship. The hands learn to be gentle rather than controlling. The voice discovers its capacity for tenderness. The body finds its natural rhythm of approach and retreat. The nervousness that initially felt like a problem to be solved reveals itself as a teacher, a guide toward a more authentic way of being in love. The ultimate gift of the shadow's nervous dance is its reminder that love is not a performance to be perfected, but a mystery to be lived. The trembling, the nervousness, the honest betrayals of the ego's control are not obstacles to love, but invitations into its deeper truth. They are the shadow's way of saying that the heart's secrets cannot be contained by the mind's careful strategies, that authentic love requires the courage to be seen in all our imperfect humanity. In the end, the shadow's nervous dance becomes a form of prayer, a physical offering of vulnerability that honors both the beloved and the sacred nature of love itself. Through the body's honest responses, the masculine soul learns to worship at the altar of authentic feeling, to find in its own nervousness not a source of shame, but a doorway to the divine mystery of human connection. In the hidden laboratory of the soul, where the great work of transformation unfolds beyond the reach of conscious awareness, love assumes the role of the supreme alchemist. Here, in the secret chambers of the psyche, the most ordinary elements of human interaction undergo a metamorphosis as profound as any medieval magician ever dreamed. The base metal of casual connection slowly transmutes into the gold of genuine care, and the masculine soul, often without recognizing the process, finds itself becoming something altogether new and precious. The ancient alchemists understood that transformation cannot be forced or hurried. It requires patience, the right conditions, and above all, the mysterious catalyst that they called the philosopher's stone. In the alchemy of love, the beloved becomes this sacred catalyst, her very presence initiating chemical changes in the masculine psyche that work with the slow persistence of geological time. The man who carries secret love in his heart becomes his own laboratory, his own vessel for the great work of psychological transformation. This process begins in the darkness of the unconscious, in that fertile soil where all meaningful change takes root. Like seeds that must rest in winter earth before they can burst forth in spring, the transformative effects of love germinate in the hidden depths of the soul, preparing for an emergence that the conscious mind has not yet acknowledged. The ego, busy with its daily concerns and carefully maintained persona, remains largely unaware of the profound reconstruction happening in the basement of being. The first sign of this alchemical process is a subtle but unmistakable softening of the soul's hard edges. The man who has perhaps prided himself on his rationality, his emotional control, his ability to navigate the world with cool detachment, begins to notice small cracks in his armor. Conversations that once would have been mere exchanges of information take on new depth and meaning. The voice that spoke only of facts and figures begins to carry undertones of poetry. The heart that had been carefully protected behind walls of logic starts to show itself in gestures of unexpected tenderness. This transformation is not dramatic or obvious. It does not announce itself with fanfare or sudden revelation. Instead, it works like water slowly reshaping stone, like the patient action of wind carving canyons from solid rock. The changes are so gradual that they might be missed entirely by the casual observer, but they are no less profound for their subtlety. The masculine psyche is learning to inhabit a new form of strength, one that includes vulnerability, one that makes space for the full spectrum of human feeling. The alchemical tradition speaks of the nigredo, the albedo and the rubedo, the blackening, whitening and reddening that mark the stages of transformation. In the alchemy of secret love, these phases unfold not in the external world, but in the interior landscape of the soul. The nigredo represents the dissolution of the old self, the gradual softening of rigid patterns that have kept the heart in exile. The man in love may experience this as a kind of confusion, a sense that his usual ways of being no longer fit quite right, that something is stirring in the depths that he cannot yet name. During this phase of dissolution, the ego's carefully constructed defenses begin to feel increasingly cumbersome. The persona that once served as perfect armor against the world's demands now seems to restrict rather than protect. The man finds himself longing for simpler, more authentic forms of expression, even as he struggles to understand what this longing means. No, the presence of the beloved acts as a solvent, gently dissolving the artificial barriers that have kept him separate from his own deeper nature. The albedo, the whitening phase, brings a new clarity to the transformed consciousness. The man begins to see himself and his relationships through different eyes. The beloved becomes a mirror in which he glimpses possibilities he had never considered, ways of being that are both stronger and more gentle than his previous modes of existence. This is not the projection of the anima in its raw form, but something more refined, more integrated. He sees in her not just his own unlived potential, but a living example of how different aspects of human nature can be harmoniously combined. During this phase, the masculine psyche undergoes what can only be described as a refinement of its essential nature. The rough edges that once marked his interactions with others begin to smooth themselves into more graceful forms. The voice that might have been harsh or dismissive discovers new registers of kindness. The hands that were accustomed to taking and controlling learn the art of giving and supporting. The eyes that once looked upon the world with judgment begin to see with compassion. This transformation is not a loss of masculine strength, but a deepening of it. The man who learns to be gentle does not become weak. He becomes powerful in a new way. His strength is no longer brittle and defensive, but flexible and responsive. Like a tree that bends with the wind rather than breaking against it, he develops a resilience that comes from working with life's forces rather than against them. The beloved, often unconsciously, becomes both the inspiration and the teacher for this transformation. Through her presence, he learns that strength and tenderness are not opposites, but complementary aspects of a mature personality. Her example shows him that it is possible to be both powerful and vulnerable, both independent and connected, both rational and emotional. The anima, working through the projection onto the beloved, is teaching the ego about the possibility of integration rather than division. The rubedo, the final reddening, represents the emergence of the transformed self into the light of consciousness. This is not necessarily a moment of dramatic revelation, but rather a gradual recognition that something fundamental has shifted in the way he relates to the world. The man who has undergone love's alchemical process finds that his interactions with others carry a new quality of presence. He listens more deeply, responds more thoughtfully, and offers his attention as a gift rather than a transaction. This transformation extends far beyond his relationship with the beloved to encompass his entire way of being in the world. The colleague, who once seemed irritating, becomes a fellow traveler deserving of patience. The friend who needed support finds him more available and responsive. The family member who had been taken for granted receives new consideration and care. The alchemy of love has taught him that all relationships are sacred, that every human encounter is an opportunity for the practice of refined attention and genuine care. The process of transformation happens largely in the darkness of the unconscious, protected from the harsh light of self-consciousness that might interfere with its delicate work. The man undergoing this change may not recognize what is happening to him. He might attribute his new gentleness to maturity, his increased empathy, to life experience, his deeper capacity for connection to personal growth. In a sense, all of these explanations are true, but they miss the deeper truth that love has been working in him like a master alchemist, transforming the very substance of his being. The beloved herself may not understand her role in this transformation. She sees only that he seems more present when they talk, more attentive to her words and feelings, more willing to engage in the kind of deep conversation that feeds the soul. She may notice that his humor has become more gentle, his observations more thoughtful, his overall presence more grounded and peaceful. What she cannot see is the profound internal work that her mere existence has catalyzed in the hidden chambers of his psyche. This alchemical process serves the greater work of individuation, the lifelong journey toward wholeness that Jung identified as the central task of human development. The man who learns to love, even in secret, takes a crucial step toward integrating the disparate aspects of his personality. The anima, through her projection onto the beloved, teaches him about the feminine aspects of his own nature, not in the sense of becoming less masculine, but in the sense of becoming more complete. The transformation that occurs through love's alchemy is irreversible, even if the specific love that catalyzed it never finds expression, even if the beloved never knows the role she played in his metamorphosis. The changes in his essential nature remain. The capacity for gentleness, once awakened, does not disappear. The ability to see others with compassion, once developed, becomes a permanent part of his repertoire. The willingness to be vulnerable, once accepted, opens doorways that can never be fully closed again. Like the philosopher's stone of ancient legend, love has the power to transmute base metals into gold. But unlike the alchemist's dream of material transformation, this is a transmutation of the soul itself. The man who loves learns to see the gold that was always present in the lead of ordinary existence. He discovers that the divine has been hiding in plain sight, waiting for eyes refined enough to recognize its presence in the most common elements of human experience. The great work of transformation that love initiates extends beyond the individual, to touch the collective unconscious of humanity itself. Each person who undergoes this alchemical process becomes a carrier of the refined consciousness that the world desperately needs. The gentleness that emerges from love's crucible, the compassion that grows from projected vulnerability, the wisdom that comes from integrated opposites, All of these become gifts, not just to the beloved, but to the entire human community. In the end, the alchemy of transformation reveals love's deepest secret, that it is not ultimately about possession or even union with another, but about the refinement of the lover's own essential nature. The beloved serves as the catalyst, the occasion, the inspiration for a process that was always meant to happen. Love in its secret working transforms not just how we feel about another person, but how we exist in the world as human beings. The man who emerges from love's alchemical crucible is not the same person who entered it. He has been refined, purified, made more precious through the mysterious action of forces beyond his conscious control. The base metal of his ordinary existence has been transmuted into the gold of genuine care, and the world is richer for his transformation. This is love's ultimate alchemy, not the creation of relationship, but the creation of a new kind of human being, one capable of recognizing and responding to the sacred dimension that exists in every moment of ordinary life. In the depths of the psyche, where the conscious mind surrenders its watchful guard, there exists a sacred chamber that Jung understood as the repository of all that moves us beyond the boundaries of ordinary experience. Here, in this hallowed space of the unconscious, the beloved becomes not merely a person, but a living constellation. Each memory a star, each shared moment a luminous point of light in the vast darkness of inner space. The soul, when touched by the mystery of unspoken love, transforms into an archivist of the ineffable. It begins to collect with the reverence of a monk, illuminating manuscripts, gathering fragments of shared existence as if they were relics blessed by divine presence. This is not the crude collecting of the ego, which hoards and possesses, but the sacred gathering of the self, which recognizes in these moments the golden threads that weave the tapestry of meaning itself. Every word she speaks becomes encoded in the deep structures of memory, not as mere information, but as living scripture. Her voice, with its particular cadence and warmth, echoes through the corridors of consciousness long after the conversation has ended. The unconscious mind, that faithful scribe, records not just the content of her words, but their emotional resonance, the way they seem to vibrate at frequencies that unlock chambers within the heart previously sealed. When she mentions her preference for morning coffee over evening tea, this simple revelation transforms in the alchemical furnace of hidden devotion into something approaching the sacred. The unconscious gathers this fragment, coffee, morning, the ritual of beginning, and places it reverently in the growing constellation of her being. It becomes not just a fact about her preferences, but a key to understanding the rhythm of her days, the way she greets the world, the private ceremonies that define her relationship with time itself, the gesture she makes when thinking, perhaps touching her temple with slender fingers, or the way she tilts her head slightly to the left, becomes enshrined in the memory palace of the heart. The unconscious mind, that supreme artist of the invisible, captures not just the physical movement, but its essence, the way it reveals something fundamental about her inner landscape. This gesture becomes a hieroglyph in the private mythology. He constructs around her presence a symbol pregnant with meaning that only his soul can fully decipher. In this process, Jung's concept of the transcendent function reveals itself through the transformation of the mundane into the numinous. Ordinary conversations about weather, work, or weekend plans undergo a mysterious alchemy within the depths of unconscious devotion. Her casual mention of loving autumn leaves becomes a revelation about her capacity for finding beauty in transition, in the poetry of decay and renewal. The unconscious carefully files this away, not as mere preference, but as insight into her soul's relationship with the cycles of existence. The beloved's laugh, spontaneous, unguarded, becomes a sound that reverberates through the chambers of memory with the resonance of temple bells. The unconscious mind captures its pitch, its duration, the way it transforms her entire face and weaves these elements into the growing tapestry of her essence. This laugh becomes a talisman against despair, a sound that can be summoned in moments of darkness to remind the soul that joy exists, that lightness is possible, that somewhere in the world beauty expresses itself through the simple act of her delight. Even her silences achieve weight and meaning in this sacred collection. The way she pauses before answering a difficult question, the comfortable quiet that settles between them during shared tasks, the contemplative stillness that surrounds her when she's lost in thought. All of these become precious stones in the crown of memory. The unconscious recognizes that these silences speak volumes about her depth, her capacity for reflection, her comfort with the spaces between words where truth often dwells. The phenomenon Jung described as the constellation of complexes takes on particular poignancy in the realm of secret love. Each memory, each fragment of shared experience becomes magnetized by the central complex of the beloved. Seemingly unrelated moments begin to cluster around her image, creating patterns and connections that reveal the unconscious mind's desperate attempt to understand and preserve the mystery of her being. A conversation about favorite books transforms into insight about the landscapes of her imagination. Her recommendation of a particular author becomes not just a literary suggestion, but a map to the territories her mind loves to explore. The unconscious carefully catalogues not just the titles she mentions, but the way her eyes light up when discussing certain themes, the passion that animates her voice when she describes a particularly moving passage. These details become coordinates in the constellation of her intellect, points of light that reveal the contours of her inner world. Her preferences in music, art, even food become sacred texts to be studied and interpreted. When she mentions loving the melancholy beauty of rain against windows, this revelation becomes a key to understanding her relationship with solitude, her capacity for finding companionship in nature's moods, her appreciation for the bittersweet dimensions of existence. The unconscious mind, that devoted scholar of the beloved, recognizes in this preference a kindred spirit, a soul that finds beauty in longing itself. The way she moves through space, the particular grace of her walking, the unconscious elegance of her gestures, the way she inhabits her body with such natural dignity becomes encoded in the muscle memory of attention itself. The unconscious captures these physical truths not as mere aesthetics, but as expressions of her essential being, the way her soul manifests through flesh and bone and movement. In quiet moments of reflection, when the conscious mind finally stills its constant chatter, these collected fragments begin to speak to each other across the vast spaces of inner silence. Memory converses with memory, gesture connects with word, preference aligns with preference, and slowly, carefully, a portrait emerges that transcends the sum of its parts. This is not the crude assemblage of facts that the ego might construct, but the living mandala of a soul recognizing itself in another. The beloved's relationship with time, whether she arrives early or fashionably late, whether she savors moments or rushes through experiences, whether she dwells in past remembrances or lives fully in the present, becomes another sacred dimension of the constellation. These temporal patterns reveal something essential about her spirit's relationship with existence itself, and the unconscious mind records these rhythms as if learning the secret music by which her soul moves through the world. Her reactions to beauty, to suffering, to the unexpected gifts that life occasionally offers become precious indicators of her heart's true nature. The way her face softens when she encounters something genuinely moving, the particular quality of attention she brings to others' pain, the spontaneous generosity that emerges when she recognizes genuine need. All of these become jewels in the treasury of memory, each one a window into the depths of her compassion. The unconscious becomes particularly attentive to the moments when her guard drops, when the social persona gives way to something more authentic and vulnerable. These instances, brief as they may be, become the most precious relics in the collection, for they offer glimpses of the true self that dwells beneath all the necessary performances of daily existence. The way she looks when she thinks no one is watching, the expression that crosses her face during unguarded moments of reflection, the particular quality of presence she brings to intimate conversations. These become the crown jewels of the inner shrine. Through this patient collecting, this devoted archiving of fragments, the soul creates its own mythology around the beloved. She becomes not just a person, but a living symbol, a constellation of meaning that guides the heart through its darkest nights. Her image becomes a mandala of possibility, a sacred geometry that reveals something essential about the nature of love itself, not as possession or achievement, but as recognition, as the soul's capacity to see its own deepest truths reflected in another's being. In the end, this constellation of memory becomes a mirror in which the devoted soul discovers its own capacity for reverence, its own hunger for beauty, its own recognition of the sacred that dwells within the ordinary moments of human connection. The beloved becomes a teacher without knowing it, instructing the heart in the arts of attention, devotion, and the patient recognition of grace wherever it chooses to manifest itself in the world. From the primordial depths, where all human patterns first stirred into consciousness, where the collective wisdom of countless generations lies sleeping like seeds in winter earth, there emerges an ancient knowing that precedes thought, precedes decision, precedes even the recognition of love itself. It is the archetype of the guardian, that primordial figure who has stood watch at the threshold between safety and danger since the first human heart learned to cherish what it could not bear to lose. In the secret chambers of masculine devotion, where love moves like underground rivers, carving invisible channels through the bedrock of being, this guardian instinct awakens with the inevitability of sunrise. It does not announce itself with fanfare or conscious declaration. Instead, it manifests as a subtle shift in the very gravitational field of attention, a barely perceptible alteration in the way space arranges itself around the beloved's presence. Jung understood that the archetypes do not merely inhabit us, we inhabit them, like ancient temples whose walls we cannot see, but whose sacred geometry shapes every movement of our souls. The guardian archetype carries within its essence the accumulated wisdom of every protector who ever stood between the vulnerable and the void. Every shepherd who counted his flock by starlight, every sentry who chose vigilance over sleep so that others might rest in peace. This protective instinct does not emerge from the ego's desire to be seen as heroic or noble. It springs from depths far more profound, from the collective unconscious, where the masculine principle has always recognized its sacred task to create and maintain the conditions within which life can flourish. It is the same force that compels birds to build nests with meticulous care, that drives wolves to scout the perimeter of their territory, that inspires trees to spread their canopy wide enough to shelter the smaller life that grows beneath their protection. The secretly loving man finds himself positioning his body differently in shared spaces, though he may not consciously realize this shift. When walking beside her, he instinctively takes the side closer to traffic, his unconscious mind calculating angles of potential harm and placing himself as buffer between her vulnerability and the world's careless momentum. This is not performance, but pure instinct, The way water finds its level or iron filings arrange themselves around a magnet's invisible field. In crowded places, he becomes a subtle navigator of safe passage, his awareness expanding like ripples on a pond to encompass not just his own movement through space, but hers as well. He notices the drunk patron at the bar before she does, the ice patch on the sidewalk that might catch an unwary step, the broken glass glinting in the parking lot where her car is parked. His consciousness extends itself around her like a protective, veiled, not possessive, but genuinely protective, the way a lighthouse casts its beam across dangerous waters without claiming ownership of the ships it guides to safety. The guardian archetype expresses itself through countless small offerings of sanctuary that accumulate like morning dew, each droplet insignificant alone, but together creating the conditions for life to flourish. He finds himself checking weather forecasts not for his own sake, but to know if she might need warning about the coming storm. His phone becomes an instrument of protective attention, noting the traffic conditions on her usual route home, the construction delays that might strand her in unfamiliar neighborhoods after dark. When she mentions feeling uncomfortable in certain social situations, his unconscious mind immediately begins constructing subtle escape routes and safe harbors. He positions himself within conversation groups so that she has clear sightlines to exits, so that his presence becomes a kind of social shield behind which she can retreat if the interaction becomes overwhelming. This is not manipulation, but the purest expression of care, the creation of conditions within which her authentic self can emerge without fear of judgment or harm. The protective instinct manifests even in the realm of emotional safety, where the masculine guardian learns to recognize the early warning signs of her distress with the sensitivity of a seismograph detecting distant tremors. He becomes attuned to the subtle changes in her voice that signal approaching overwhelm, the particular quality of silence that indicates she is processing something painful, the almost imperceptible shift in posture that suggests she is bracing herself against some inner storm. In these moments, the guardian archetype does not rush forward with solutions or advice. Instead, it creates space, psychological space, emotional space, the kind of sacred emptiness that allows another soul to unfold its pain without fear of being judged, fixed, or dismissed. He learns the art of presence without intrusion, offering his attention like a shelter that requires nothing in return, asking no rent for the sanctuary he provides. This protective instinct extends into the digital realm as well, where modern vulnerabilities require new forms of guardianship. He finds himself naturally screening the emotional climate of group chats before she enters them, sensing when certain conversations might wound her sensitive nature. Without fanfare or announcement, he subtly redirects discussions away from topics that he knows trigger her anxiety, not through obvious intervention, but through the gentle art of conversational aikido, using the momentum of dialogue to guide it towards safer harbors. The underground water metaphor reveals itself with particular clarity in how this protective care shapes the landscape of their interactions over time. Like water carving canyons through solid rock, his consistent attention to her safety creates channels of trust that neither of them may consciously recognize. She begins to relax more fully in his presence, her nervous system recognizing at some cellular level that here is a space where vigilance can be temporarily suspended, where the exhausting work of self-protection can be shared with another consciousness. Jung's understanding of enantiodromia, the principle by which any psychological extreme will eventually swing toward its opposite, finds expression in the guardian's paradoxical strength. The more genuinely protective he becomes, the less he needs to demonstrate or prove his protection. True guardianship moves toward invisibility, toward a kind of care so seamlessly integrated into the fabric of relationship that it becomes as natural and unnoticed as breathing. The protective instinct learns to discern between genuine threats and the projections of his own anxiety. The immature guardian seeks to control every variable, to eliminate all possibility of pain or discomfort from the beloved's experience. But the archetypal guardian, tempered by wisdom, recognizes that true protection sometimes means stepping back, allowing the beloved to encounter her own challenges and develop her own strength, while remaining close enough to offer support, if genuinely needed. This discernment becomes particularly crucial in the realm of emotional protection, where the line between supportive presence and suffocating interference can be hair-thin. The wise guardian learns to sense when her struggles are the necessary friction through which her soul is polishing itself to greater brilliance, and when they represent genuine threats to her well-being that require intervention. This is the difference between the helicopter guardian, who hovers anxiously over every potential difficulty, and the lighthouse guardian, who maintains steady presence while allowing others to navigate their own waters. In professional settings, the protective instinct manifests as a kind of career guardian angel, subtly advocating for her contributions in meetings where her voice might otherwise be overlooked, ensuring she receives credit for her ideas, creating opportunities for her talents to be recognized without making his support obvious or patronizing. He becomes skilled in the art of invisible amplification, finding ways to reflect her light back into spaces where it might otherwise be absorbed or ignored. The guardian archetype also awakens a protective instinct toward her dreams and aspirations, recognizing these as the most vulnerable and precious aspects of her inner landscape. He learns to guard her hopes with the same fierce tenderness with which one might protect a newborn creature, never dismissing her ambitions as unrealistic or impractical, never allowing his own fears or limitations to cast shadows over her vision of what might be possible. This protection of dreams requires particular subtlety, for dreams die not from dramatic assault, but from the slow erosion of daily discouragement, the accumulation of small doubts and casual dismissals that eventually convince the dreamer that their vision was mere fantasy. The wise guardian becomes a steward of possibility, reflecting back to her the brilliance of her own aspirations when she begins to doubt their validity, holding steady faith in her potential when her own confidence wavers. The protective instinct reveals its deepest wisdom in the recognition that true guardianship seeks ultimately to make itself unnecessary. The highest expression of the guardian archetype is not to create dependency, but to foster the beloved's own capacity for self-protection, self-advocacy, and self-trust. Like a master teacher who gradually transfers knowledge until the student surpasses the teacher, the evolved guardian uses his protection as a temporary shelter within which her own strength can grow to full flowering. As this ancient instinct continues to shape the underground channels of relationship, it creates something far more valuable than mere safety. It creates the conditions for authentic intimacy. When another soul recognizes that they are truly seen, truly valued, truly protected not as possession, but as precious being worthy of care, they begin to lower defenses that may have been held in place for lifetimes. In the shelter of genuine guardianship, the authentic self finally feels safe enough to emerge from whatever caves and fortresses it has constructed against a world that so often mistakes tenderness for weakness. The guardian's instinct, flowing like underground water through the landscape of secret love, ultimately reveals itself as one of the most profound expressions of the sacred masculine. Not dominance, but protection, not control, but care, not possession, but preservation of that which is too beautiful, too valuable, too irreplaceably precious to risk losing to the casual cruelties of an unconscious world. from the primordial depths where all human patterns first stirred into consciousness, where the collective wisdom of countless generations lies sleeping like seeds in winter earth, there emerges an ancient knowing that precedes thought, precedes decision, precedes even the recognition of love itself. It is the archetype of the guardian, that primordial figure who has stood watch at the threshold between safety and danger since the first human heart learned to cherish what it could not bear to lose. In the secret chambers of masculine devotion, where love moves like underground rivers, carving invisible channels through the bedrock of being, this guardian instinct awakens with the inevitability of sunrise. It does not announce itself with fanfare or conscious declaration. Instead, it manifests as a subtle shift in the very gravitational field of attention, a barely perceptible alteration in the way space arranges itself around the beloved's presence. Jung understood that the archetypes do not merely inhabit us, we inhabit them, like ancient temples whose walls we cannot see, but whose sacred geometry shapes every movement of our souls. The guardian archetype carries within its essence the accumulated wisdom of every protector who ever stood between the vulnerable and the void, every shepherd who counted his flock by starlight, every sentry who chose vigilance over sleep so that others might rest in peace. This protective instinct does not emerge from the ego's desire to be seen as heroic or noble. It springs from depths far more profound, from the collective unconscious, where the masculine principle has always recognized its sacred task to create and maintain the conditions within which life can flourish. It is the same force that compels birds to build nests with meticulous care, that drives wolves to scout the perimeter of their territory, that inspires trees to spread their canopy wide enough to shelter the smaller life that grows beneath their protection. The secretly loving man finds himself positioning his body differently in shared spaces, though he may not consciously realize this shift. When walking beside her, he instinctively takes the side closer to traffic, his unconscious mind calculating angles of potential harm and placing himself as buffer between her vulnerability and the world's careless momentum. This is not performance, but pure instinct, the way water finds its level or iron filings arrange themselves around a magnet's invisible field. In crowded places, he becomes a subtle navigator of safe passage, his awareness expanding like ripples on a pond to encompass not just his own movement through space, but hers as well. He notices the drunk patron at the bar before she does, the ice patch on the sidewalk that might catch an unwary step, the broken glass glinting in the parking lot where her car is parked. His consciousness extends itself around her like a protective field, not possessive, but genuinely protective, the way a lighthouse casts its beam across dangerous waters without claiming ownership of the ships it guides to safety. The guardian archetype expresses itself through countless small offerings of sanctuary that accumulate like morning dew, each droplet insignificant alone, but together creating the conditions for life to flourish. He finds himself checking weather forecasts, not for his own sake, but to know if she might need warning about the coming storm. His phone becomes an instrument of protective attention, noting the traffic conditions on her usual route home, the construction delays that might strand her in unfamiliar neighborhoods after dark. When she mentions feeling uncomfortable in certain social situations, his unconscious mind immediately begins constructing subtle escape routes and safe harbors. He positions himself within conversation groups so that she has clear sightlines to exits, so that his presence becomes a kind of social shield behind which she can retreat if the interaction becomes overwhelming. This is not manipulation, but the purest expression of care, the creation of conditions within which her authentic self can emerge without fear of judgment or harm. The protective instinct manifests even in the realm of emotional safety, where the masculine guardian learns to recognize the early warning signs of her distress with the sensitivity of a seismograph detecting distant tremors. He becomes attuned to the subtle changes in her voice that signal approaching overwhelm, the particular quality of silence that indicates she is processing something painful, the almost imperceptible shift in posture that suggests she is bracing herself against some inner storm. In these moments, the guardian archetype does not rush forward with solutions or advice. Instead, it creates space, psychological space, emotional space, the kind of sacred emptiness that allows another soul to unfold its pain without fear of being judged, fixed, or dismissed. He learns the art of presence without intrusion, offering his attention like a shelter that requires nothing in return, asking no rent for the sanctuary he provides. This protective instinct extends into the digital realm as well, where modern vulnerabilities require new forms of guardianship. He finds himself naturally screening the emotional climate of group chats before she enters them, sensing when certain conversations might wound her sensitive nature. Without fanfare or announcement, he subtly redirects discussions away from topics that he knows trigger her anxiety, not through obvious intervention, but through the gentle art of conversational aikido, using the momentum of dialogue to guide it towards safer harbors. The underground water metaphor reveals itself with particular clarity in how this protective care shapes the landscape of their interactions over time. Like water carving canyons through solid rock, his consistent attention to her safety creates channels of trust that neither of them may consciously recognize. She begins to relax more fully in his presence, her nervous system recognizing at some cellular level that here is a space where vigilance can be temporarily suspended, where the exhausting work of self-protection can be shared with another consciousness. Jung's understanding of enantiodromia, the principle by which any psychological extreme will eventually swing toward its opposite, finds expression in the guardian's paradoxical strength. The more genuinely protective he becomes, the less he needs to demonstrate or prove his protection. True guardianship moves toward invisibility, toward a kind of care so seamlessly integrated into the fabric of relationship that it becomes as natural and unnoticed as breathing. The protective instinct learns to discern between genuine threats and the projections of his own anxiety. The immature guardian seeks to control every variable, to eliminate all possibility of pain or discomfort from the beloved's experience. But the archetypal guardian, tempered by wisdom, recognizes that true protection sometimes means stepping back, allowing the beloved to encounter her own challenges and develop her own strength, while remaining close enough to offer support if genuinely needed. This discernment becomes particularly crucial in the realm of emotional protection, where the line between supportive presence and suffocating interference can be hair-thin. The wise guardian learns to sense when her struggles are the necessary friction through which her soul is polishing itself to greater brilliance, and when they represent genuine threats to her well-being that require intervention. This is the difference between the helicopter guardian, who hovers anxiously over every potential difficulty, and the lighthouse guardian, who maintains steady presence while allowing others to navigate their own waters. In professional settings, the protective instinct manifests as a kind of career guardian angel, subtly advocating for her contributions in meetings where her voice might otherwise be overlooked, ensuring she receives credit for her ideas, creating opportunities for her talents to be recognized without making his support obvious or patronizing. He becomes skilled in the art of invisible amplification, finding ways to reflect her light back into spaces where it might otherwise be absorbed or ignored. The guardian archetype also awakens a protective instinct toward her dreams and aspirations, recognizing these as the most vulnerable and precious aspects of her inner landscape. He learns to guard her hopes with the same fierce tenderness with which one might protect a newborn creature, never dismissing her ambitions as unrealistic or impractical, never allowing his own fears or limitations to cast shadows over her vision of what might be possible. This protection of dreams requires particular subtlety, for dreams die not from dramatic assault, but from the slow erosion of daily discouragement, the accumulation of small doubts and casual dismissals that eventually convince the dreamer that their vision was mere fantasy. The wise guardian becomes a steward of possibility, reflecting back to her the brilliance of her own aspirations when she begins to doubt their validity, holding steady faith in her potential when her own confidence wavers. The protective instinct reveals its deepest wisdom in the recognition that true guardianship seeks ultimately to make itself unnecessary. The highest expression of the guardian archetype is not to create dependency, but to foster the beloved's own capacity for self-protection, self-advocacy, and self-trust. Like a master teacher who gradually transfers knowledge until the student surpasses the teacher, the evolved guardian uses his protection as a temporary shelter within which her own strength can grow to full flowering. As this ancient instinct continues to shape the underground channels of relationship, it creates something far more valuable than mere safety. It creates the conditions for authentic intimacy. When another soul recognizes that they are truly seen, truly valued, truly protected not as possession, but as precious being worthy of care, they begin to lower defenses that may have been held in place for lifetimes. In the shelter of genuine and guardianship, the authentic self finally feels safe enough to emerge from whatever caves and fortresses it has constructed against a world that so often mistakes tenderness for weakness. The guardian's instinct, flowing like underground water through the landscape of secret love, ultimately reveals itself as one of the most profound expressions of the sacred masculine. Not dominance, but protection, not control, but care, not possession, but preservation of that which is too beautiful, too valuable, too irreplaceably precious to risk losing to the casual cruelties of an unconscious world. In the hidden chambers of the heart, where love dwells unnamed and unclaimed, there exists a poison so exquisite in its torment that even the wise have mistaken it for madness. It is the sacred jealousy, not the crude rage of the ego that demands ownership, but the profound disturbance that arises when the secretly loving soul witnesses the beloved's attention flowing like water toward other vessels, other hearts, other possibilities of connection. Jung understood that jealousy, in its deepest psychological essence, serves as both revealer and teacher, stripping away the comfortable illusions with which we protect ourselves from the raw truth of our attachments. It arrives like lightning in the night sky of consciousness, illuminating landscapes of the psyche that we had preferred to keep shrouded in darkness. In its burning light, we see clearly, perhaps for the first time, the true extent of our investment in another's being. The secretly loving heart experiences this jealousy with particular intensity, for it has no legitimate claim to make, no recognized right to feel disturbed by the beloved's freedom to bestow her attention wherever she chooses. The secretly loving heart experiences this jealousy with particular intensity, for it has no legitimate claim to make, no recognized right to feel disturbed by the beloved's freedom to bestow her attention wherever she chooses. The pain doubles, back upon itself, the anguish of witnessing her warmth directed elsewhere, amplified by the shameful recognition that such anguish has no proper grounds for existence. It is the jealousy of the ghost, the spectre who haunts the periphery of another's life without the substance of acknowledged relationship. This sacred jealousy begins not with dramatic confrontations or obvious betrayals, but with the smallest observations that pierce the heart like needles finding their mark. She laughs at another's joke with a spontaneity that seems somehow more genuine than the laughter she has shared with him. Her eyes light up when discussing a colleague's ideas. With a brightness that appears to exceed the illumination he has managed to kindle in her gaze. The casual touch she places on another's arm carries an ease that makes him suddenly aware of the careful distance she maintains with him. The alchemical nature of this jealousy reveals itself in how it transforms ordinary moments into crucibles of inner fire. A simple scene she engages in animated conversation with someone else across a crowded room becomes a theater of psychological torture. The secretly loving consciousness cannot look away, yet cannot bear to witness the ease with which she shares her vitality with others, the naturalness with which she allows them into the warm circle of her attention. Unlike the jealousy that springs from established relationships with their clear boundaries and negotiated expectations, this sacred jealousy exists in the liminal space between recognition and denial, between hope and despair. It feeds on uncertainty, growing strong in the absence of clear definition. Every friendly gesture she makes toward others becomes potential, evidence of either her fundamental kindness or her specific indifference to him. Every moment of her attention given elsewhere becomes a small death of possibility. The poison works its way through the bloodstream of consciousness with the persistence of a fever, coloring every interaction with its bitter tint. When she mentions spending time with friends, his mind immediately begins the work of jealous archaeology, searching for clues about who these friends might be, what they might offer her that he cannot, what qualities they possess that have earned them easy access to the treasure of her company. In the secret theater of the mind, elaborate scenarios begin to unfold like toxic flowers blooming in darkness. He imagines conversations she has with others that are more stimulating than any dialogue they have shared. He conjures images of her laughing more freely with friends who have never known the weight of unspoken love, who can therefore offer her the gift of lightness that his heavy adoration makes impossible. The shadow aspects of his own personality emerge in these moments of jealous contemplation. The generous heart that typically wishes the best for all beings discovers within itself previously unknown capacities for resentment. The mind that usually seeks to understand and empathize finds itself constructing elaborate justifications for why others don't truly deserve her friendship, why their appreciation of her lacks the depth and authenticity of his own recognition of her worth. Yet this sacred jealousy serves a function that transcends its immediate torment. It becomes a teacher in the ancient mystery school of the heart, instructing the lover in the fundamental laws of attachment and freedom. Through its sharp lessons, he begins to understand the true nature of his feelings, not the romantic notion of wanting her happiness above all else, but the raw truth of wanting her happiness to be centered around him, to flow through him, to find its source in his devoted attention. The jealousy strips away the comfortable lies with which love often disguises itself. It reveals the possessive aspects of devotion that prefer to hide behind noble rhetoric about selfless care. In the burning light of jealous awareness, the lover must confront the uncomfortable truth that his love is not the pure, egoless offering he had imagined it to be, but something far more complex, far more human, far more honestly selfish in its deepest motivations. This recognition becomes the beginning of true spiritual work within the relationship. The mature lover learns to sit with the jealousy without immediately acting upon it, to let it burn through him like purifying fire while observing its effects on his consciousness. He begins to understand that the jealousy is not primarily about her behavior but about his own expectations, his own unexamined assumptions about what love should provide, what devotion should guarantee. The sacred jealousy teaches the paradox that Jung recognized in all profound psychological processes, that the very thing that torments us most deeply often contains the seed of our greatest liberation. Through learning to experience jealousy without being consumed by it, the lover begins to develop the spiritual muscle required for genuine love, the capacity to care deeply while allowing freedom, to invest completely while accepting uncertainty. The jealousy becomes particularly acute when she speaks of past relationships or expresses appreciation for other men's qualities. Each reference to former lovers feels like a small betrayal, not because she has broken any promise to him, but because it forces him to confront the reality that her heart has known other devotions, other intimacies, other possibilities of connection that existed in realms forever closed to him. The secretly loving consciousness finds itself trapped in a peculiar form of temporal jealousy, envying not just present attentions given to others, but past experiences that shaped her before he knew her. He finds himself resenting the lovers who held her when she was young and unguarded, the friends who witnessed her becoming who she is, the mentors who guided her development during years when he was absent from her life. This jealousy extends backward through time, creating a complex web of resentment toward all the influences that contributed to making her the person he now adores. Yet within this torment lies a profound spiritual opportunity. The sacred jealousy, when approached with consciousness rather than reactivity, becomes a doorway into the mystery of surrender. It teaches the lover that genuine love requires the cultivation of what the mystics have called holy indifference, the capacity to love completely while remaining unattached to specific outcomes, to care deeply while allowing the beloved complete freedom to distribute her affections according to her own authentic impulses. The jealousy reveals the ego's fundamental illusion that love is a finite resource that diminishes when shared, that attention given to others necessarily represents attention stolen from him. Through working with jealousy consciously, the lover begins to discover the truth that spiritual teachers have proclaimed throughout history, that love, when genuine, expands rather than contracts when expressed, that the beloved's capacity for connection with others actually enhances rather than diminishes her capacity for connection with him. The transformation of sacred jealousy from poison to medicine requires the development of what Jung might have called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposites in creative tension without collapsing into either extreme. The lover learns to acknowledge the jealousy while refusing to be enslaved by it, to feel the pain while maintaining perspective, to honor the depth of his attachment while cultivating the wisdom of detachment. This process initiates him into one of love's most advanced teachings, that true devotion seeks not to possess but to appreciate, not to control but to celebrate, not to limit but to liberate. The sacred jealousy, when fully experienced and consciously integrated, becomes the alchemical fire that burns away the dross of possessiveness, leaving behind the pure gold of unconditional love. In the end, the secretly loving heart discovers that jealousy was never really about the beloved's behavior toward others, but about his own relationship to uncertainty, to powerlessness, to the fundamental vulnerability that love requires. Through learning to dance with jealousy rather than being danced by it, he develops the spiritual strength necessary to love without guarantees, to invest without insurance, to open his heart completely while trusting in outcomes he cannot control. Psyche, sacred jealousy, thus reveals itself as one of love's most sophisticated teachers, initiating the devotee into mysteries that can only be learned through direct experience of the fire that burns away everything false, leaving only the indestructible essence of genuine care. In its flames, the lover discovers that his greatest torment contains the seeds of his ultimate liberation, that the very thing that seemed to threaten his love was actually its deepest protector, ensuring that only the authentic essence would survive the purification process. Through this sacred burning, the secretly loving heart learns perhaps the most difficult lesson of all, that love's highest expression is not the fulfillment of personal desire, but the recognition of the beloved's complete freedom to choose her own path, even if that path leads away from the lover's dreams. In accepting this freedom completely, without reservation or hidden agenda, the jealousy transforms from poison into medicine, from torment into teaching, from obstacle into opportunity for the soul's ultimate expansion into the mystery of unconditional love. In the sacred architecture of existence, time flows like a river, whose current we rarely question, until love redirects its course, transforming the very nature of temporal experience from linear progression into something far more mysterious. A currency of devotion, a sacrifice willingly offered on the altar of presence. The secretly enamored soul discovers that time, which once seemed abundant and renewable, suddenly becomes both infinitely precious and desperately scarce in the radiance of the beloved's existence. Jung understood that the psyche operates according to its own temporal laws, where minutes can expand into eternities and years can collapse into moments, where the heart's priorities rewrite the fundamental equations by which consciousness measures value. In the presence of unspoken love, time reveals its true nature, not as mechanical progression, but as sacred space, malleable and responsive to the soul's deepest investments. The transformation begins subtly, almost imperceptibly, like the first signs of spring stirring beneath winter's surface. Conversations that might once have concluded naturally find themselves extending beyond their logical endpoints, sustained by the secret hunger to remain in her presence for just one more moment, one more exchange, one more opportunity to witness. The particular way her mind illuminates whatever subject she touches with her attention, the secretly loving consciousness begins to perform complex calculations that would baffle any economist, weighing the value of time spent in ordinary pursuits against the immeasurable worth of moments shared in her company. Sleep becomes negotiable, meals become perfunctory, obligations become obstacles to be navigated around the precious hours when her schedule might intersect with his. The very structure of his days begins to reorganize itself around the gravitational pull of her availability. This reordering of temporal priorities operates largely beneath the threshold of conscious awareness, driven by forces more fundamental than rational decision-making. He finds himself arriving early to gatherings where she might appear, not from eagerness that he would admit to himself, but from some deep instinct that recognizes every additional moment of potential connection as treasure beyond price. Thus, 15 minutes of small talk before she arrives becomes sacred time, pregnant with possibility. When forced to choose between competing demands upon his schedule, the secretly enamored soul discovers that the decision-making process has been mysteriously simplified. Invitations that don't include the possibility of her presence lose their appeal with startling clarity. Social obligations that once seemed important fade into insignificance when weighed against the chance to spend an evening in the same room, where she breathes the same air, shares the same conversations, exists within the same temporal bubble. The phenomenon extends beyond merely rearranging external schedules into something far more profound, a fundamental shift in how consciousness itself experiences the passage of time. Minutes spent in her presence seem to dilate and expand each second stretching to accommodate the intensity of attention he brings to every detail of her being. Her laughter doesn't just occur in time, it creates time, opening pockets of eternity where the soul can rest in pure appreciation of beauty made audible. Conversely, periods of separation feel subject to temporal compression that defies physics. Hours spent apart seem to race by without content or meaning, leaving behind only the hollow ache of absence and the anticipation of reunion. The secretly loving heart discovers that time without her presence feels somehow less real, like the intermissions between acts of a play when the stage stands empty and the audience waits for life to resume. This transformation of temporal experience reveals itself most clearly in the elaborate strategies the enamored soul devises to extend moments of connection beyond their natural conclusions. Conversations that might reasonably end with polite farewells find themselves prolonged through increasingly creative means. Additional questions that occur to him just as she's about to leave, forgotten details that suddenly seem urgent to share, offers of assistance with tasks that provide legitimate reasons to walk together toward her next destination. The art of the graceful exit becomes a complex negotiation between his hunger for continued presence and his understanding that such hunger must remain concealed. He learns to manufacture organic conclusions to their interactions that feel natural while secretly calculating how to maximize every possible second of shared time. The goodbye that appears spontaneous has often been rehearsed in his mind, timed, to occur at the last possible moment before absence becomes inevitable. Technology becomes both blessing and curse in this new temporal economy. Text messages offer opportunities for connection that transcend physical presence, creating virtual spaces where conversation can continue beyond the boundaries of shared location. Yet each message sent also becomes a gamble with time itself. The minutes or hours that might pass before her response arrive stretch like centuries, each notification sound carrying the potential for either joy or the peculiar emptiness that accompanies messages from anyone other than her. The secretly loving soul learns to read the temporal patterns of her communication with the dedication of an anthropologist studying ancient customs. The speed of her responses becomes a language to be decoded. The time of day she typically answers messages becomes a window into the rhythms of her private world. The length of her replies transforms into metrics by which he measures his success at capturing her interest and attention. Phone conversations become exercises in temporal alchemy, where the secretly enamored consciousness attempts to transform minutes into eternities through the sheer intensity of presence and attention. He finds himself unconsciously prolonging these calls through subtle strategies, asking follow-up questions just as the conversation seems to be winding down, sharing stories that create natural opportunities for her to reciprocate, expressing interest in topics he knows will spark her passion and therefore extend the duration of their connection. The relationship with waiting undergoes profound transformation in love's presence. Waiting for her arrival becomes not mere passage of time, but active preparation of the soul, a sacred interval during which consciousness purifies itself for the gift of her presence. The anticipation itself becomes a form of devotion, a way of honoring the approaching moment when ordinary time will once again transform into something magical and meaningful. Even mundane scheduling decisions reveal the heart's true priorities. Through this new temporal lens, the choice between attending a career-advancing networking event and a casual gathering where she might appear becomes no choice at all. Professional obligations that once seemed crucial suddenly pale in significance when weighed against the possibility of sharing an evening in her company, listening to her voice, witnessing the particular way she engages with ideas and people. the secretly loving consciousness discovers that time spent in preparation for seeing her, choosing clothes that might please her eye, selecting conversation topics that might engage her mind, even the mental rehearsal of potential interactions, becomes its own form of devotion. These preparatory hours take on the quality of religious observance, sacred time dedicated to making oneself worthy of the gift of her attention. This reordering of temporal priorities often requires increasingly sophisticated justifications to maintain the fiction that such choices are rational rather than romantic. He becomes skilled at constructing logical reasons for decisions that are actually driven by the heart's hunger for her presence. Professional development opportunities just happen to align with events she'll attend. Social obligations suddenly seem more important when they provide cover for time spent in her vicinity. The secretly enamored soul learns to navigate the delicate balance between making time for her presence and avoiding the appearance of rearranging his entire life around her availability. Too much sudden freedom might seem suspicious to those who know his usual schedule. Too much eagerness to attend gatherings he previously avoided might reveal the true motivation behind his newfound social enthusiasm. Yet perhaps the most profound transformation occurs in the quality of attention itself during moments of shared presence. Time spent with her becomes so intensely focused, so completely present, that it achieves an almost meditative quality. Every word she speaks receives the full weight of his consciousness. Every gesture becomes worthy of careful observation. Every expression that crosses her face becomes material for later contemplation and treasured memory. This intensity of attention creates its own temporal paradox, moments that seem to last forever while simultaneously passing too quickly. The hour spent in conversation with her feels both eternal and instantaneous, providing enough experiential content to sustain weeks of reflection while leaving him always hungry for more, always aware that such time is finite and therefore infinitely precious. The currency of time reveals its true exchange rate in love's marketplace, where minutes spent in her presence purchase memories that will be replayed countless times, where hours of her attention become treasures to be carefully guarded. In the vault of consciousness, the secretly loving heart learns that time is not the democratic resource he once believed it to be, but something that gains or loses value based entirely on the quality of presence that fills it. In the end, this transformation of temporal experience becomes one of love's most revealing signatures, exposing the heart's true values through the simple mathematics of where and how time chooses to invest itself. The beloved's schedule becomes the hidden calendar around which all other plans arrange themselves. Her availability becomes the sun around which the planets of his daily obligations find their proper orbits. Through this sacred reorganization of time itself, the secretly enamored soul discovers that love doesn't just happen in time. It creates time, transforms time, reveals time's true nature as the raw material from which presence and devotion are crafted. In learning to treasure each moment spent in her vicinity, he begins to understand that time itself is not neutral, but sacred, not mechanical, but responsive to the quality of attention and care we bring to its passage through our lives. There comes a moment in the soul's journey when the weight of the unspoken becomes unbearable, when the tender secret, carried in silence like a sacred flame cupped between trembling hands, begins to burn through the very flesh that would contain it. You have arrived at this threshold, this liminal precipice, where the old world of careful concealment meets the terrifying possibility of naked truth. Here, at the crossroads between hiddenness and revelation, the psyche trembles on the edge of its own transformation. The pressure building within you is no ordinary tension. It is the archetypal force of the unexpressed seeking expression, the underground river of feeling that has carved its channels through the bedrock of your being until it can no longer be contained by the artifice of casual conversation and measured glances. This is the pressure that transforms coal into diamond, that turns the quiet seed into the splitting earth of new growth. Your love, held too long in the darkness of the unconscious, has gathered the mythic power of all suppressed truths. It has become not merely personal affection, but a force of nature demanding acknowledgement. The signs are everywhere now, scattered like breadcrumbs on the path toward inevitable disclosure. The way their name catches in your throat when others speak it, the magnetic pull that draws your attention across crowded rooms to find their face, as if your soul were compass, and they true north. The dreams that arrive unbidden, weaving scenarios of confession and connection that leave you waking with your heart racing and your rational mind scrambling to rebuild the walls that sleep had so carelessly dissolved. These are not mere symptoms of infatuation. They are the psyche's own rebellion against the tyranny of concealment. You find yourself studying your reflection with new scrutiny, searching for signs of the secret's visibility. Has it carved itself into the lines around your eyes? Does it shimmer at the edges of your carefully constructed persona, like heat waves rising from summer pavement? The mask you wear in their presence, that carefully crafted presentation of casual friendship or professional collegiality, grows heavier with each passing day. What once felt protective now feels suffocating, like wearing winter clothes in the blazing heat of your own authentic feeling. This is the burden of the threshold guardian, to stand watch at the boundary between worlds, knowing that crossing requires not just courage, but a willingness to die to who you have been, for confession is always a kind of death. The person who speaks love aloud is not the same person who held it in silence. The vulnerable self that emerges from behind the protective walls of secrecy is tender and exposed, blinking in the harsh light of acknowledgement like a creature emerging from a long winter's hibernation. Jung understood this threshold intimately, the place where the ego's protective mechanisms meet the self's demand for wholeness. He called it the edge of consciousness, where what we think we know about ourselves dissolves into the greater mystery of who we might become. To love someone openly is to step beyond the familiar territory of the known self into the wilderness of possibility. It is to volunteer for transformation, knowing that the outcome cannot be controlled or predicted. The hero's journey maps this exact territory. Every mythic quest begins with the call to adventure, that moment when the ordinary world reveals itself as insufficient, when the safe harbor of the familiar becomes a prison from which the soul must escape. Your love has become your call to adventure, demanding that you leave the comfortable country of unspoken affection for the unknown landscape of declaration. Like all mythic heroes, you stand at the threshold armed with nothing but intention and faith, knowing that the crossing will change you regardless of what waits on the other side. But this is also the lover's threshold, charged with all the archetypal energy of desire-seeking union. In the great stories of love, this moment is always terrifying. Psyche approaching Eros with her lamp, Orpheus turning back toward Eurydice, Romeo climbing toward Juliet's balcony. The beloved becomes not just another person, but a gateway to the divine, a mirror in which the soul might glimpse its own infinite capacity for connection. To confess love is to stand naked before the mystery of another consciousness, offering the most tender part of yourself with no guarantee of reciprocation. The threshold you approach is therefore doubly charged, with the hero's courage and the lover's vulnerability, with the death of the old self and the birth of the new. It pulses with archetypal energy because it represents one of the fundamental passages of human experience, the movement from hiddenness to revelation, from safety to risk, from the known to the unknown. Every fiber of your being that values security and predictability rebels against this crossing, while every fiber that yearns for authenticity and connection urges you forward. The unconscious pressure you feel is not your enemy, it is your ally. The deep wisdom of the psyche that knows concealment has become more painful than vulnerability. It is the same force that pushes the butterfly from its chrysalis, that drives the seedling to crack through concrete, that compels the tide to turn regardless of what stands in its path. This pressure is the life force itself, demanding expression, demanding growth, demanding the courage to become who you truly are beneath the careful constructions of who you think you should be. Feel how your body holds this tension. Notice the way your breath grows shallow when you imagine speaking your truth, how your pulse quickens when their presence unexpectedly enters your awareness. This is not anxiety. This is anticipation. Your nervous system is preparing for the leap, like a runner coiled at the starting line or a bird gathering itself for flight. Every cell in your body knows that stasis is no longer sustainable, that the only way forward is through the fire of authentic expression. The mask you wear grows heavier because it no longer fits. You have outgrown the persona that served you. When your love was small and manageable, when it could be contained within the boundaries of ordinary interaction. But love, when it is real, refuses to be contained. It expands like heat, like light, like any natural force that has been compressed, beyond its capacity. The careful persona that once protected your secret now constrains your spirit, and the psyche rebels against this constraint with increasing urgency. This is the paradox of the threshold. To remain safe is to suffer, but to cross is to risk everything. Yet Jung reminds us that all growth requires this passage through uncertainty, this willingness to trade the known for the possible. The individuation process itself is a series of thresholds, each one demanding that we release our grip on who we have been in order to discover who we might become. Your approaching confession is just one such threshold, but it carries within it the entire pattern of psychological transformation. The energy building within you is not just personal, it is archetypal, connected to every love story ever told, every act of courage ever performed, every moment when a human being chose authenticity over safety. You are not alone at this threshold. You are accompanied by the invisible presence of all who have stood where you stand now, who have felt their hearts racing with the same mixture of terror and exhilaration, who have discovered that love unexpressed is both the sweetest torture and the most creative force in the universe. The signs that surround you now are the psyche's own way of preparing you for what must come. They are not random occurrences, but meaningful synchronicities, the universe's way of confirming that you are aligned with a deeper current of necessity. When you find yourself thinking of them at the exact moment they appear, when their favorite song plays unexpectedly on the radio, when dreams offer scenarios of connection that feel more real than waking life, these are not coincidences, but confirmations that you are moving in harmony with the archetypal patterns that govern transformation. Trust this process, even as your rational mind searches for reasons to delay, to wait, to find the perfect moment or the perfect words. The perfect moment is always now, and the perfect words are always the truest ones you can find. The threshold will not wait for your complete readiness, because complete readiness would eliminate the need for courage. Some crossings can only be made while trembling. Some truths can only be spoken while the voice shakes with the magnitude of their revelation. You stand poised between two worlds, the world of careful concealment, where love remains safe but unexpressed, and the world of vulnerable truth, where love becomes dangerous but alive. The choice is no longer whether to cross, but when and how. The pressure building within you is the force of your own evolution, demanding that you step beyond the boundaries of who you have been into the mystery of who you are becoming. The threshold awaits, charged with all the energy of transformation, ready to receive you when you are ready to receive yourself. And so we arrive at the sacred resolution, not with the dramatic crescendo that stories often promise, but with something far more profound, the quiet integration of love's transformative power into the deeper architecture of the soul. Here, in this final movement of our inner symphony, we discover that the true purpose of secret love was never the outcome of confession or reciprocation, but the alchemical process it initiated within the chambers of your own heart. Whether your truth was spoken or remains forever held in the sanctuary of silence, the work it has accomplished cannot be undone. This is the great paradox that only the fully lived experience can teach, that love's highest function is not always union with the beloved, but union with the deepest currents of your own being. The secret you have carried has been a teacher disguised as longing, a catalyst masquerading as mere affection. Through its pressure and its presence, through the weight of its concealment and the fire of its potential revelation, you have been sculpted into someone capable of containing greater depths of feeling, wider spans of vulnerability, more exquisite sensitivity to the movements of the human heart. Jung understood this mystery intimately, that the objects of our deepest fascination are often carriers of projected aspects of our own unlived potential. The beloved becomes a screen upon which we project not just our capacity for love, but our capacity for transformation itself. In loving them, we discover pathways to parts of ourselves that had been sleeping, dormant potentials, awakening under the gentle pressure of authentic feeling. The journey inward through love's labyrinth reveals chambers in the soul we never knew existed. Whether you spoke your truth or held it sacred in silence, the individuation process that secret love initiates cannot be reversed. You are no longer the person who first felt that stirring of recognition, that quickening of the pulse that announced love's arrival. The careful construction of your former self has been dismantled and rebuilt, stone by careful stone, around this new capacity for depth. You have been initiated into one of love's most profound mysteries, that to feel deeply is to be forever changed, regardless of whether that feeling finds its echo in another. If you chose the path of confession, you have learned the terrifying beauty of standing naked before another consciousness with your heart offered like fruit in open palms. Whether met with reciprocation or gentle rejection, whether received with joy or handled with care but not returned, you have crossed the threshold from hiding to revelation and discovered that vulnerability itself is a kind of victory. You have proven to yourself that the human heart can survive its own exposure, that authenticity does not destroy us, but reveals us to ourselves in ever deeper dimensions. If you chose the path of sacred silence, you have learned the equally profound lesson of love as pure gift, affection offered without demand, feeling held without need for acknowledgement. In keeping your secret, you have discovered the monastery of the heart, where love burns as pure prayer, asking nothing, demanding nothing, simply existing as witness to the beloved's being. This, too, is a form of courage, this ability to love without possession, to feel without claiming, to be transformed by someone who may never know the depth of their impact. Both paths lead to the same destination, the integration of love's teachings into the ongoing work of becoming whole. The secret love that once felt like burden or blessing, or both, has revealed itself as one of the psyche's most elegant methods of self-education. Through its intensity, you have learned to inhabit your own depths. Through its uncertainty, you have developed tolerance for ambiguity. Through its tenderness, you have discovered reservoirs of capacity you never knew you possessed. This is the alchemy of secret love. Base metal transformed into gold, not through external validation, but through internal revolution. The lead of Ordinary consciousness, content with surface interactions and predictable emotions, has been heated in the furnace of genuine feeling until it emerged as something precious. A heart capable of profound connection, a soul stretched to accommodate greater mysteries, a self more fully realized through its willingness to be undone by love. The integration process continues long after the initial intensity subsides. Like ripples moving outward from a stone dropped in still water, the effects of deep feeling continue to reshape the landscape of your inner world. You find yourself more sensitive to the subtle currents that move between people, more attuned to the unspoken communications that flow beneath the surface of ordinary interaction. Having loved deeply, you can recognize depth in others. Having been transformed by feeling, you can perceive the transformative potential hidden in every encounter. This heightened sensitivity is both gift and responsibility. You have been initiated into one of love's secret societies, those who know that every interaction carries the possibility of profound impact, that every moment of genuine connection is sacred ground. You cannot unknow what secret love has taught you about the human heart's infinite capacity for both concealment and revelation. You have become a guardian of love's mysteries, someone who understands that the most powerful forces often move in silence, that the deepest truths are frequently held rather than spoken. The shadow integration that secret love accomplishes cannot be overstated. In confronting your own capacity for concealment, you have also confronted your capacity for deception, not malicious, but protective. You have learned to hold complexity, to live with contradictions, to be simultaneously honest and hidden. This is not hypocrisy but humanity, the recognition that we are all more multifaceted than our public presentations suggest, that authenticity sometimes requires strategic silence, that truth-telling is an art requiring both courage and wisdom. Your relationship with solitude has been forever altered. The time spent in secret communion with your feelings has taught you that being alone does not mean being lonely, that the inner world can be rich enough to sustain and nourish even when the outer world offers no reflection of your deepest experiences. You have discovered that you are capable of being your own companion in the depths, that the soul can learn to converse with itself in ways that are both comforting and illuminating. The persona you present to the world has also been refined through this process. Having lived with the discrepancy between inner truth and outer presentation, you have developed a more conscious relationship with the masks you wear. You understand now that these masks are not necessarily false, but are instruments of navigation, ways of moving through the world that protect what is most precious while allowing for authentic connection where it can be safely established. Perhaps, most significantly, your capacity for empathy has been exponentially expanded. Having known the particular loneliness of unexpressed love, you can recognize its signs in others. Having felt the weight of secrets, you can sense when someone else carries hidden depths. Having experienced the courage required for vulnerability, you can appreciate it when you witness it in others. You have become fluent in the subtle language of the heart that speaks through glances and gestures, through what is not said as much as what is. This is the gift that secret love ultimately offers, not just the experience of loving, but the development of what Jung called the feeling function, that capacity to navigate the world through emotional intelligence, to make decisions based on value and meaning rather than logic alone, to recognize the sacred dimension present in all, authentic human connection. You have been educated in the University of the Heart, and the degree you have earned cannot be revoked by external circumstances. The integration of this experience into your ongoing journey of individuation means that love's lessons become part of your essential equipment for living. The sensitivity you have developed, the depth you have discovered, the courage you have cultivated, these become tools for navigating all future relationships, resources for understanding the complex dynamics that exist between people, wisdom for recognizing when to speak and when to remain silent. Whether your secret love story continues or concludes, whether it transforms into friendship or remains forever unspoken, the transformation it has worked within you is permanent. You cannot return to the innocent unconsciousness that existed before love taught you about your own depths. You have been marked by this experience in the most beautiful way, not scarred but illuminated, not damaged but refined, not diminished but expanded beyond your former boundaries. This is the final teaching of secret love, that its ultimate purpose is not to be resolved, but to be integrated, not to find its answer, but to become part of your ever-deepening question about what it means to be fully human. In your willingness to love without guarantee, to feel without certainty, to be vulnerable without promise of protection, you have participated in one of the most sacred activities available to human consciousness, the expansion of the heart's territory, the evolution of the soul's capacity, the ongoing creation of a self large enough to contain all the mysteries that genuine feeling reveals. And so you continue, carrying within you the treasure that secret love has buried in the depths of your being, not the memory of what was or wasn't said, but the living reality of who you have become, through the sacred act of loving deeply, whether in silence or in song. Based on your script about the subtle signs of secret love through a Jungian psychological lens, here's a YouTube video description and hashtags. Video description. In the hidden chambers of the masculine psyche, love moves like morning mist through consciousness, felt rather than seen, known rather than understood. This exploration reveals how the Anima, Jung's feminine aspect of the male soul, recognizes love before the conscious mind can comprehend it. When a man falls secretly in love, his entire psychological architecture transforms. The persona struggles to maintain its mask, while the unconscious expresses truth through the language of glances, proximity, and transformed attention. Drawing from Carl Jung's depth psychology, we examine how secret love serves the greater work of individuation, the journey towards psychological wholeness. The beloved becomes a carrier of anima projection, reflecting back undeveloped aspects of the masculine soul seeking integration. Through subtle signs, the mathematics of proximity, the intensity of visual attention, the unconscious choreography of presence, love reveals itself as both catalyst and teacher. This isn't merely about romantic attraction, but about the profound psychological transformation that occurs when the heart recognizes its counterpart. Whether expressed or held in sacred silence, secret love becomes an alchemical process, dissolving the old self to birth something more complete and authentic. Share your own observations about love's subtle language, or reflect on how these psychological insights resonate with your journey toward wholeness. Hashtags Geiters Carl Jung, Jungian psychology, Anima projection, Individuation, shadow work, depth psychology, secret love, psychological transformation, masculine psyche, unconscious love.